For millennia, white has been one of the most popular and sought after pigeon colours. White birds are often associated with peace, and are also commonly the favourites of new and young pigeon fanciers. What surprises many people is that although it looks very simple, white is in fact one of the most complicated colours available to pigeon breeders. Today we'll talk about how to breed white pigeons, but this episode will be a little different to others in the How to Breed series. Unlike the videos on barless or recessive red, where one main gene produces the desired colour, today we'll discuss at least 5 different ways to breed white pigeons. Before we get started, I'd also like to suggest you visit the white page on the Pigeon Genetics Wiki, which I've linked in the description. Okay, to understand how to breed white pigeons, we first need to understand what white is, before we start thinking about genetics. A pigeon, or its feathers, are white when little or no pigment is produced. So that is what we're aiming for when we want to breed white pigeons. We want to use our knowledge of genetics to stop as much pigment as possible from being laid down in the developing feathers. The less pigment that is produced, the whiter the pigeon will be. So what genes can we use for this? Perhaps the most common gene is called recessive white. This gene simply turns off all feather pigment production, which as we now know is our goal here. As you probably already know, for a pigeon to express a recessive trait like this one, they need to carry 2 copies of the gene. They must get 1 copy from each parent. If a pigeon only carries 1 copy, then it will not be white, but it is still able to pass the gene onto its children. This means that it is possible for 2 normal-looking pigeons to produce a white child if they both carry the recessive white gene. You might remember that this is the same way that barless and recessive red are inherited. A pigeon who is homozygous for recessive white, that means they carry 2 copies of the gene, will be a pure white pigeon, and they will have dark eyes. Sometimes though, you might want to breed a white pigeon with normal coloured eyes. How do we do that? This second method is more complicated than the first, and involves multiple genes, but some people find white pigeons with coloured eyes to be more attractive and to be worth the effort. So remember, when trying to breed white pigeons, our goal is actually to prevent as much pigment as possible from being produced. A common gene that lowers the amount of pigment in the feathers is grizzle. Unlike recessive white though, grizzle does not impact the pigeon's eye colour. Now, grizzle is an incomplete dominant gene, so if we have a pigeon with 2 copies of the gene instead of 1, we get an even whiter bird. And if we change the base colour from blue to the lighter ash red, we can produce a pigeon that is almost entirely white. So the genotype we're aiming for here is an ash red homozygous grizzle. Of course, not all pigeons with this genotype will be entirely white. You will have to select and breed from the whitest birds you produce as you develop your white family. There are other modifier genes that you can add to lighten the birds further if necessary. For example, dilute, and also counterintuitively, spread. Spread will remove the darker red pigment and replace it with lighter ash coloured pigment, which can give you a whiter pigeon overall. Recessive white and ash red homozygous grizzle are the 2 most common recipes for producing a white pigeon, but there are actually quite a few other ways to do it. Let's quickly run through some of them now. Perhaps the most simple of the genotypes that will produce a white pigeon is the gene called dominant white. Obviously, this is the dominant trait, so only 1 copy of the gene is needed to produce a white pigeon. Unfortunately, this gene isn't common outside of a few European pigeon breeds, so it isn't available or useful to most breeders. Another is a hyperexpression of pied. There are many different pied genes in pigeons, which turn off pigment production in certain areas, and it is possible to combine them in a way that produces a white pigeon. Usually, white pigeons produced this way will have dark eyes, similar to a recessive white bird, so this method isn't appropriate if you are aiming to breed white birds with coloured eyes. It is also possible to breed albino pigeons, however these birds have red or pink eyes and very poor eyesight, so poor that they are generally not able to safely fly outside of the loft. As you can see, there are quite a few different ways to produce white pigeons. The methods I've just discussed are not the only ways. There are many others, including using some of the stipper or stencil genes. But because there are so many different genotypes that will produce white, you cannot always expect that pairing 2 white pigeons together will produce more whites. You need to know what genes your birds carry, or you'll waste a lot of time with useless trial and error. One question that has been asked lately is, are white pigeons actually doves? The answer is simple. If the bird is one that you can let out of the loft and expect to return, It is a Columbolivia domestic pigeon, and the eye colour of the bird doesn't change that. If it is another species, for example a white diamond dove or ringneck dove, then it is not a domestic pigeon. As I said at the start of the video, white is a colour that appears very simple, but is in fact quite complicated. If you'd like to ask any questions, I'll happily answer them here in the YouTube comments or at pigeongenetics.com. And I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters, who make these genetic videos possible. If you'd like to show your support, a link is in the description. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.